This is essayette number 5, which is called Meaning. It's the shortest of all the essayettes, so it'll take only a couple of minutes to read, and then I'll look and see if we have any questions about it. Meaning. Like belief, meaning is a derivative of the artistic encounter, not an inherent quality of an object or act of art. Since each encounter is different from all others, meaning is not fixed. It begins with the striking of the spark and develops through the receptor's translation of it into the context of his or her entire life and being. As with engagement and distance, reception and translation are concurrent and interactive. Therefore, meaning is at once derivative and ascriptive. If an encounter is of importance to the receptor, translation will continue afterward in a sort of half-life that consists of inner dialogue, the written or spoken opinions of others, and perhaps the demi-encounters afforded by the electronic media. This process also can, and often does, precede an encounter in the form of word-of-mouth opinion, reviews, background material, and so on, a partial pre-translation. This ongoing translation is an extension of distance in that it is analytic and reflective. It does not partake of the direct sensory impact of the encounter, but does bear its imprint, either in anticipation or recollection. It selects the elements of the encounter needed by the receptor and incorporates them into the peculiarities of his mind and heart. And that is where meaning, always in flux, will reside. Meaning is what survives, in whatever form it survives. It is through the accumulation of these residues of meaning that a receptor may move from belief in an artistic moment to an investment in the artistic object or act, in an art form as a whole, in art as a way of life. So, I told you it was short. So short, I guess, that it slipped by everyone before anyone could think of a question, which leaves me with no choice but to interrogate myself. And actually, I'm slightly surprised to find no questions or challenges about meaning, because plenty of argumentation has gone down on the meaning of meaning, even within the confines of debating about it as it applies to an artistic encounter, where a lot of it has to do with whether or not we can determine a creator's intent. And if we can, whether or not that should settle any particular matter about his or her work. If we ask a creative artist of any kind, what do you mean by that? We'll get answers ranging from, it's up to you, to T.S. Eliot's notes on the wasteland. And among creators who depend on interpreters, as in any of the performing arts, attitudes from, you must follow every instruction to the letter, to, it's out of my hands now, go do your magic. Now, when I state in my first sentence that, quote, meaning is a derivative of the artistic encounter, not an inherent quality of an object or act of art, unquote, I'm speaking from the receptor's point of view, not the creators or performers. And that remains true throughout this brief essay. I am saying that whatever a given receptor takes away from a given performance, and that could be something of profound significance that changes that person forever, or something that reaffirms who he or she already is and what he or she already believes. Or it could be neither, just some time passed without leaving much of an imprint at all, in which case it has not amounted to much. All of us who are professionally involved and who are ourselves interpreters, and that includes those who critique, are receptors of one kind or another before we are anything else. I'll return to that thought soon, but for the moment, I'll stick with receptors as we usually think of them, as audience. In the book, I speak of a tapestry that each of us weaves, mostly subconsciously, with respect to a work. It includes everything one has ever seen, heard, or heard of with respect to the work, including all the circumstances of those encounters, the people, the places, the moods and atmospheres, the trips to and from, and so on. At least all one remembers of them, or sometimes has forgotten, and then in some little flash remembers again. Sometimes I try to visualize one of my own tapestries, had I the skill at weaving or perhaps at collage to create it. For instance, the first opera I ever saw was Carmen at the New York City Opera when it was still at the city center on 55th Street. So at any sight of Carmen, or just a fleeting memory of something about it, I'm apt to recall the rushed trip there, the fact that we were late, and my father and I ran up the stairway to the second balcony as the overture was playing, the first sight of the old Mecca Temple auditorium, all the events I've seen there since and counting, and all the trips and meals and companions of those events. The stage pictures and the singers themselves, how they looked and sounded. The American contralto Winifred Height, who sang this role a lot and married the tenor Eugene Conley, and an amusing story the conductor Robert Lawrence, under whom I later sang, related about an incident at a Cincinnati Zoo Opera performance involving another American, Co Glade, who also sang the role often. Then the Greek tenor Vassou Argyris, whom I saw also as Canio, and who I gather had a substantial interwar career, and there's a book about him I've meant to order but haven't, and how the next day I pulled out my father's Columbia Acoustical 78 of Florencio Constantino singing the Flower Song to compare. The American bass baritone James Pease, who a few seasons later was my first Hans Sachs, and who, along with a number of other city opera singers, soon defected to Hamburg to sing great roles and earn a living, and is the balustrade of the first recording of Peter Grimes under Britain, and is also the Escamillo of a weird English language Hollywood bowl Carmen on CD, conducted and arranged by Leopold Stokowski, and sure enough, with Winifred Height, and coincidentally with Ramon Vinay, who is soon the José of my first Met Carmen. And so you get it. All the Carmen performances since, and the broadcasts and recordings and videos, and habaneras on the Bell telephone hour, or in that TV update starring Beyonce, etc., etc. Much of all this being quite blurry, at least until I look at an old program and ask myself, did I see that? And then recall something about it, a great note or a cracked one, a scenic effect, the person I was with, it was raining. And it's all in there somewhere all the time. But one more that always comes up at what in 1968 was still the Kirov in what was still Leningrad, and the young people in the next box who'd been flown in from East Germany by the Soviet government for cultural education, and the ballet segments that were added in Acts 2 and 4, including the farandole from L'Arlésienne, and how after the performance, the young soprano Perlasova, who had made her debut that evening as Mikhaila, was standing by herself in the lobby of our hotel with a little bouquet, rather forlorn, and the dank atmosphere in the lobby, and how off the lobby was the American bar, where they had one of my favorite beers, Pilsner Urquell, on draft, and how some 40 or more years later, when that Kirov company, now once again the Mariinsky, came to the Metropolitan with Prokofiev's worst opera, Semyon Kotko, there was Perlasova in a character part. And along with her, the hotel lobby and the bar and the beer and the East German kids and all the rest of it about that excursion to the Soviet in the Brezhnev time. So I think that if I could create my tapestry or collage, some representation of all these people and places, and all the other Carmen people and places would have to be in it. And if I could somehow take all that in, with all the feelings and thoughts and opinions it would summon up, that would be my Carmen tapestry, and would in effect be the meaning of Carmen for me. One opera and Conrad. That is in part what I mean when I say that the context for this incorporation of fresh Carmen sparks is one's entire life and being, though of course that embraces much else besides. Now, much about my tapestry is peculiarly mine. No one else has had the cumulative experience with any given opera or with all of opera that I've had, nor has anyone else experienced any single performance, even any single moment of a performance, exactly the way I have, even if you live to my age, and both you and Carmen persist with each other, and opera itself is still hanging in. Your tapestry won't look the same as mine. Despite the most radical differences, though, there will also be an uncanny resemblance. And this goes to a question Steve raised earlier about the individual and shared experience among audience members. Because Carmen has a large portion of irreducible musical and dramatic content of sight and sound impact that all of us, at least on a certain broad wavelength, experience in roughly the same way, and interpret, assign meaning to in roughly the same way. We may argue over aspects of what Carmen means to us, or to what we think and feel about it, but we will have much more in common about it. Otherwise, it wouldn't keep us bound in common to it, and would not have been doing that for nearly 150 years. It wouldn't be an iconic work. And all this talk about us as interpreters and of something called a work leads us forward into the next essayette, whose title is Creation and Interpretation, and the one after that, called The Text and the Work. They're longer, so perhaps we'll have some questions.